Welcome everybody, welcome all our Torah Anytime viewers. Tonight we are learning L'Refuah Shlema to Zahana Bat Zoya and Leilu Nishmat to Avraham ben Chaim Yehuda and Yecheskel ben Avraham. Alright, so now, you know something interesting, like, I don't know if I say this by every holiday, but whenever we get to a holiday, I'm always like, what? Chanukah already? And then I'm like, what? Purim already? And then Pesach already? And I feel like I keep on saying the same things, and I don't know why. You know how sometimes it's, you keep on getting surprised by the same things, and you're like, why am I getting surprised? But it's so crazy how fast time goes by. And where I notice these things is by when we have one holiday after another holiday, and then after another, and it comes so fast together, you're like, where does all the time go? I don't know if this is for everybody. I think that's what it is. The older you get, the faster time goes. I remember when I was a little kid, I think I was 10 for about 16 years. That's how it felt. So it's something that, really time goes by super, super fast. So the question really is what do we do with the time? Do we utilize it appropriately? And that's really what it should be as a reminder. When time goes by so fast, you look back and be like, wait a minute, so how did I utilize my time since the last holiday? So tonight, it's just an FYI, it has nothing to do with tonight's class. But tonight, I want to speak about something that we spoke about somewhat in previous years, but it's going to be in a completely different format and a twist than we always had. And that is, we know that during Chanukah there were two miracles. There was the miracle of the oil, and then there was the miracle of the war. Now, the most, I guess we want to say the famous miracle will be the miracle of the oil. The less famous miracle will be the miracle of the war. Reason being, one of the reasons is that we celebrate literally the miracle of the oil. We light the Chanukah candles. In fact, we say, She'asa nisim la'avotenu b'yamim hahem b'zman hazeh. It's referring to the miracle on the oil. Furthermore, when we spin the dreidel, something about the dreidel, we're spinning the dreidel, what does it say on the dreidel? There's a nun, gimel, hey, and a shin. So it's nes gadol hayasham, or it could be hayapo, depending on where you're buying your dreidel. But the interesting thing is that it says nes gadol. It's a big miracle. And this is a reference to also the miracle of the oil. Now, we understand it was a miracle, right? They had enough oil for one day, and it lasted for 8 days. Now, that's a miracle, but is that a great miracle? Nes gadol, that's already a huge miracle? Is that something that we would classify as gadol? In fact, where else do we see a nes gadol in the Torah? You look at Pesach. Pesach has the Exodus, Yitzias Mitzrayim. It has 10 plagues. Crazy stuff happened. The entire nature of the world turned upside down. Yet, it doesn't say nes gadol. You have Kriyat Yamsuf, the splitting of the sea. Literally, you had miles high of water, and the Jews walking on dry land, the Egyptians running behind them, and drowning on what was dry land just a few seconds ago. And yet, that's still not considered a nes gadol. We don't say She'asa nisim la'avotenu b'yamim hahem b'zman hazeh on the miracle of Yetziat Mitzrayim. We have Shavuot, for example. Shavuot is known as Man Matan Toratenu. This is the time that we got the Torah from God. We heard God speak. So we were there. The miracles that were going on were crazy. We discussed this when we spoke about the Shuv of Shavuot, the hidden story of Shavuot. But there were so many miracles. The skies opened up. We were able to see everything. That's not called Nes Gadol. We have, there was 10 constant miracles in the Bet HaMikdash. If you want to look it up for all the 10, for the list of all 10, it's in Mishnah and Avot, in the 5th parak, the 5th Mishnah. For example, there was never a fly that was seen in the slaughterhouse. Now, if anybody has ever been to a slaughterhouse, I don't know why you've been there, but if you have been there, the place, if it's opened or something like that, it's flooded with flies. Of course, the flies are attracted to it. Furthermore, the rains did not distinguish the wood-burning fire that was on the altar. It stayed always lit. There was never a snake or a scorpion that caused injury in Jerusalem, which nowadays doesn't sound like it's a big deal, but in those days, everything was opened. So there was snakes and scorpions all over the place. Furthermore, one of the big ones is that when you went into Jerusalem, when you went into Bet HaMikdash, you were so crowded that you could literally be lifted off the floor. You know, I don't know if you have ever been there. Now it's Corona, so everybody is 6 feet apart, or everybody pretends to be 6 feet apart, whatever it is, depending on your congregation. But it's something that we don't remember what squishy means. I remember when I was in Israel, let's say, when I went to, the Kever of Rabbi Bar Yochai and Lag BaOmer. It's crazy. You don't have to walk. You just stand and somehow you're moving. You're like stuck between two people and it just like shift. It's sort of like a wave. You just like go. There's this like tightness, a squishiness that goes on. The Bet HaMikdash, it was like that. And then what happens when everybody needed to bow down in the Bet HaMikdash, all of a sudden, when the Kohen Gadol mentions God's name, everyone bowed down. And then all of a sudden everybody had 4 amot. You're talking about 6 to 8 feet on each side of them with space. Now, how does that even make sense? You imagine you have millions and millions of people coming to the Bet HaMikdash, right? Which is not, it was big, but it was not, it can't hold so many people. Everybody there was squished. All of a sudden they have to bow down, everybody has plenty of room. Now that's a very big miracle. Yet that is not considered Nes Gadol. Chanukah, Nes Gadol. That, not Nes Gadol. Yitzhak, not Nes Gadol. All these things, not Nes Gadol. What's so special about Chanukah? Furthermore, if you want to say, oh, it has to do with the oil, that's in reference to Nes Gadol. So the Gemara in Shabbat, page 22b, tells us that in the Bet HaMikdash there was Ner HaMaravi that also stayed lit the entire time. And this happened day in and day out for hundreds of years. And yet, even though this was a miracle, that the Ner HaMaravi stayed lit, from the time that it was lighting till the next time that it was supposed to be lit, it always stayed lit, it still wasn't called a Nes Gadol. So the question that we have to figure out is, why is it so special in Chanukah that number one, it's a Nes Gadol, number two, we say Sha'as HaNisim. Now we're going to ask another question, but before we get to the other question, we have to give a brief introduction into the history of what was going on during the time of the Greek occupation when the story of Chanukah happened. Now, historically, the Jewish nation had 2 different types of enemies. We had the enemies like the Egyptians, like the Persians, Haman, like the Crusades, like Hitler, who all they wanted to do was to destroy us physically. They wanted to kill us brutally, whatever it is, just get us dead. Just make it dead, make it done with, get rid of the Jews. That was what we're kind of used to, historically. Then all of a sudden comes the Greek occupation. All of a sudden comes the exile of Yavan, of Greece. And they didn't mind if we stay alive. They're like, no, you could stay alive. They didn't attack us in our physical beings. They attacked us in our spiritual beings. The Greeks were not after our physical, extermination. They were after our spiritual extermination. To see how they did that, one of the first things that Antiochus did was take control over the temple. And he did was by influencing the office of the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. We're going to discuss about this, shortly. And after he got the Kohen Gadol in his back pocket, he tried to dissolve the Jewish calendar. Because in Antiochus understood that the Jewish people are very, very time obsessed. Very, very time obsessed. And I know I started off by saying that has nothing to do with the class, with the little rant that I gave, but it really does. Because we are time obsessed. When you think about it, everything that we're doing in Judaism is surrounding time. You have Shabbat, that comes in time. You have the observance of Rosh Chodesh, the new moon, that is also around time. So what Antiochus did was he tried to destroy the aspect of time for the Jewish nation. Now, how did he do that? He said, no more, you're not allowed to keep Shabbat. You're not allowed to keep any more of the holidays. You're not allowed to keep Rosh Chodesh. And then furthermore, he forbid kosher, he forbid the studying of Torah. In fact, he burnt a lot of Torah scrolls. He even sacrificed pigs on top of sacred Jewish books to defile them. And finally, Antiochus forbade circumcision, Brit Milah. He didn't want Brit Milah. Now this was coming out from the Greek side. Now what was going on with the Jewish side? From the Jewish side, there was also a situation, sort of a civil war that was going on. Now, the worst enemies people think was the Greek. That they were the worst enemies. You look at many historians, it's not only the Greeks that were the problem. It was the Jews that became Misyavnim. They became Hellenistic. That means that they wanted to be like the Greeks. Now, to understand to the extent that this went to, the Greeks, they competed in gymnasiums, and they were very, very into their bodies. Their bodies were their temple. That's something that was the Greek came up with. It's something that they were very into, and they competed without any clothing. So when the Jews wanted to compete, they obviously stood out differently because they had a Brit Milah. The Greeks did not have a Brit Milah. So there were many Jews, unfortunately, that underwent special surgery that would go and would make them look like they did not have a Brit Milah, sort of reverse the Brit Milah that they had. And then they would go and unfortunately they would send their children to these gymnasiums. When we say gymnasium, we think, okay, they were going to the gym, they're going to work out. No, it was very different back. It was something that not only they focused on whatever sports that they did, but it was very, very heavily involved in idol worship, in Avodah Zarah. thing that was going on during this time is that you had the Jews that stayed strong to the Torah, and then you had the Jews, unfortunately, that went with the Yevanim. They became Hellenistic. They all of a sudden started clashing with each other. There was a civil war going on in the Jewish nation. So besides the pressure that was coming in from the outside, there was pressure also from the inside. And to make matters worse, in the 3rd century BCE, there was two students by the name of Tzadok and Basios. They started preaching a new form of Judaism. And this was to remove the belief of the divinity of the oral law. Meaning that the Torah Shebal Peh is from the rabbis. It's nothing to do with God. They're famously known as the Tzedukim, or I think it's Sadducees or something like that in English. So they were known as the Tzedukim. Now these Tzedukim, they believed that the Torah comes from God, but the oral law, that doesn't come from God. But the question that people ask, they're like, wait a minute, how is that possible? There are so many laws in the written law that doesn't make any sense without the oral law. There's missing information. So you know what they answer? They answer that each man would go and decide what it means, the Torah means, and they would act as according to their own thoughts, and that is fine. The Tzedukim also went, and they didn't believe in the immorality of the soul. They didn't believe in punishments or reward, for that matter, in the afterworld. So the Tzedukim were taking the Torah and really were twisting it. Now, fast forward to the time of where Chanukah happened. Now you have the Hellenistic Jews and you have the Tzedukim. These sort of like joined the pack. They started, joining together. So you had over here the people that wanted to become like Greek, and the people that were already trying to get rid of the oral law, making problems among Jews, teaming up together, and they were all going against what were known as the Orthodox sect, which was known as the Perushim, or the Pharisees. They were known as the people that went and they followed the Torah the way that it was supposed to, the way that it was ought to be. To tell you the extent of how bad it went, is we look at how many Kohanim Gedolim there were during the first temple versus the second temple. During the first temple, the first Beis HaMikdash, there were 18 Kohanim Gedolim. There was 18. And you're talking about 400 years, you're talking about 18 Kohanim, the Gedolim. In the second temple, which was 420 years, there was over 300 Kohanim Gedolim. There was over 300. You're talking about from 18 to 300. What happened over here? How come there was 18 in the first one and all of a sudden there was over 300 in the second one? And the answer is that once, like we said before, Antiochus, once he came to the throne, way that he tried to control the Jewish nation was to get control of the Kohen Gadol. And how did he get control of the Kohen Gadol? He basically gave it over to whoever was the highest bidder. Whoever wanted to give him the most money for being Kohen Gadol, he was a Kohen Gadol. Even people that were not Kohanim ended up being Kohen Gadol. Now, what was the problem with this? And I don't know how people didn't even go and realize this from here. I guess this is how power hungry people were. Is that if you are not on a high enough level, you are not spiritually high enough level, you didn't live out the year, especially after Yom Kippur. If you're a Kohen Gadol and you're not a high level person, you didn't live out the year. So most of the Kohanim died within the year. They died on Yom Kippur. And yet many of them still kept on coming. You're talking about over 300 of them kept on coming. That's how far, unfortunately, the Jewish nation sank, that there was such a turnover of Kohanim Gadolim because they weren't on a level that they should be a Kohen Gadol. And not only that, there was Avodah Zarah in the Bet HaMikdash. The Jews unfortunately sacrificed idols. We know the famous story and how the Chanukah story really sort of started. It was in the year 167 BCE, where the Greeks, what they wanted to do is they wanted to get the Jewish nation to go and remove Judaism. So they tried to go and make them sacrifice, like a pig, for example, to the Greek gods. And they tried to do this in the town of Moda'in. This is a town that's a little bit outside of Yerushalayim. And they went and they tried to get the Kohen over there of the town, the elder of the town, which his name was Matisyahu. He was a Kohen, and he wanted to go, and they told him, you have to go and sacrifice this pig to this Avodah Zarah, and he refused. And then there was a Hellenized Jew over there who was willing. He says, no, I'll do it. I'll sacrifice to this God. And he went and he started to sacrifice to God. Matthew got so upset, he took out his knife and he murdered the Jew. He murdered the other Romans at the time. And this is what sparked the Chanukah revolution, so to speak. So what we see over here, from this brief historical overview, is that the Jews were not on the highest level. The Jews from the inside were being influenced to leave Judaism. The Jews from the outside were being influenced to leave Judaism. And guess what happened? The Jews started leaving Judaism. There was assimilation. There was things that were going on. And this is where the story of Chanukah takes place. Now we can understand the next question. Next question is, I want to bring you something from Rabbi Shimshon Pincus. The famous question that we asked before is based off the Rambam, Maimonides, in Hilchot Chanukah, the 4th parak, halacha Yudbet, 12, halacha 12. It says, Mitzvat ner Chanukah, mitzvah chaviva hi ad meod. The mitzvah, the commandment of the candle of Chanukah, lighting the candles of Chanukah, lighting the oil of Chanukah, it's a mitzvah, and then the Rambam uses a terminology that he never uses anywhere else. And that is chaviva hi ad meod. It is very dear, it's very beloved. Now the question is, all mitzvot are beloved. Everything is beloved. And we know that. But the question is, why did the Rambam, who was very, very particular of every single word that he wrote, why did he mention that this mitzvah of Chanukah is chaviva, it's so beloved and nothing else? If anything, if you were to ask anybody what would be a mitzvah that's very beloved, some would say maybe a tog. You have people that are looking at the togim, they're looking at they're buying diamonds, and rightfully so. And they're spending hundreds of dollars, and they're spending hours and hours looking for the perfect etog. Or maybe you'll say it's the mitzvah of Sukkah, where God is sort of hugging the Jewish nation. Or maybe matzah, people are very particular on matzah. There's so many mitzvot that people are very particular with that I were going to say that it's more, you could say it's more beloved than the mitzvah of Chanukah. So the question is, why is it that of all the mitzvot, mitzvah of Chanukah is something that's considered beloved, chaviva ad meod, maybe mezuzah, maybe tefillin, maybe writing a sefer Torah, why is it only and specifically Ner Chanukah? So now we asked here so far 3 questions. Question number 1 is, why is Nes Chanukah considered Nes Gadol, such a great miracle? Question number 2 is, why is the only place we say She'asa Nisim only on Nes Chanukah, on the miracle of the oil? Again, this is all going only on the oil, not on the miracle of the war. And thirdly, what is so beloved? What is so chaviva? What is so beloved by Ner Chanukah as opposed to anything else? So I want to share with you the answer from Shimshon Pincus. And by the way, I don't know if you guys been following me long enough to know that I quote Rabbi Shimshon Pincus quite often. And I strongly think, first of all, the Torah that Rabbi Shimshon Pincus brings is unbelievable. It's so beautiful. I strongly recommend everybody to buy all the Sfarim of Rabbi Shimshon Pincus and go through all of them. He has on women, he has on tefillah, he has on munah, he has on everything. It's so powerful. He connects it. I was once speaking to my brother-in-law from Israel, and this is when I started singing. So I said, which Sfarim do you use? So I said, one of the things I said was, Rabbi Shimshon Pincus is something that is one of my go-to, Sfarim. And he says, oh yeah, Rabbi Shimshon Pincus, you know what he does? Is that he takes something so deep, so Kabbalistic, and makes it so attainable, so understandable for everybody. So I strongly recommend everybody to go and learn from Rabbi Shimshon Pincus. So Rabbi Shimshon Pincus brings this answer. The Mishnah Bua, in the end of Sif Reshut Ched, end of the 218, what happens? The Shulchan Aruch brings down if someone has a miracle that performs that basically someone lives through a miracle. So the Mishnah Rabbi goes and brings down that it's a big inyan, it's a big thing to go and set aside every year that it should be a Yom HaZikaron, it should be a day of remembrance, and they should give charity to the poor. They should say maybe Tehillim, maybe they should even make a Seudah Hodaya, a Seudah of thanks that they had merit to go through this miracle. And says Rabbi Shimshon Pincus, many people make a mistake. That you know what Jewish holidays are? Jewish holidays are, like Chanukah and Purim, for example, it's a reminder of a particular historical event. Says Rabbi Shimshon Pincus, this has nothing to do with a historical event. This has nothing to do with like Pesach, for example. It's not because, historically we were saved in this time, so let's make a Sudat Hayah. That's not the focus of Pesach. In fact, the Torah tells us in Exodus chapter 27, verse 9, it says, Hayom hazeh niyeta la'am. This day you were made to a nation. Meaning that without Pesach, there would not be an existence of a Jewish nation. Shavuot is not just a time when we experience, a crazy miracle. It's a time that we got the Torah, we got the Matan Torah. This is a time that we actually became a Klal Yisrael. We weren't just a nation anymore. Now we became the Jewish nation. Sukkot, for example, is a time that we got a hug and a kiss from Hashem. It's not an historical event that we're celebrating. Because without these holidays, says Rabbi Shimshon Pincus, there would not have been an existence to the Jewish nation. Goes and elaborates, Rizal goes and says like this. It says every piece of furniture, like a chair or a table, stands on feet. It's known as raglaim. Raglaim are feet. The Jewish nation also stands on something that's called 3 feet. These are known as the Shalosh Ragalim. Shalosh Ragalim is the 3 holidays, 3 feet, basically the 3 stands of Judaism. That's Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. But says Rabbi Pinkus, the Gemara in Shabbat, page 21b, goes and it says, what's the mitzvah of Chanukah? To lighting the Chanukah. The Gemara says, mitzvah mishetishka hachama at shetichle regel min hashuk. What's the mitzvah of Chanukah? The mitzvah of Chanukah is when from sunset until the traffic, until people stop walking in the marketplace. What is the wording that the Gemara uses? Until the foot ceases from the marketplace. Meaning that Chanukah is also a foot of Judaism. And without Chanukah, this will all collapse. Judaism is holding also not just on the Shalosh Regalim of Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, but it's also on Chanukah. Now we know the special aspects of Pesach, for example. We became a nation. We went out of Egypt. The special concept of, the special lesson, if you want to say, of Shavuot, we got the Torah. The special things that we learn out from Sukkot, it's a time of dekut, of connection to God. What's the special lesson of Chanukah? Says Rabbi Pinkus, this is where we learn how to cope and deal with our difficulties, with our darkness, with our sufferings, and with our exile. There are many people that go, and how do they deal with their problems? They repress it. They suck it in, and they try to forget about it. But that's not the correct way. The correct way is you know how to have to deal with it. And Chanukah teaches us on how to deal with these situations. So let's try to go and explain this. The difference between the Jewish nation and, let's say, the other nations of the world vis-a-vis dealing with God is not that the Jewish nation says that there is a God. The fact that there is a God is very obvious. Anybody with a half a brain could go and realize that there is a God. Even in the dollar, American dollar, it says, "In God we trust." Even though atheists are trying to go and try to remove that, but it still says, "In God we trust." Meaning that anybody with a half a brain goes and understands that there is a God. You look at the world, you know that there's some sort of creator. But there was a deep philosophical questions that many philosophers were going and dealing with. And that is, okay, so let's say that there is a God. But how can we go and have a connection between us and God? Think about the connection between human and animals. Can a human go and understand or learn or be capable of communicating with an animal? And I'm not talking where you teach your dog how to fetch. Can you communicate? Can you talk to animals? Now, if you think of there's animals, there's a language of the animals. I'm not talking about Shlomo HaMelech, separate case. But you think about animals, there's a language of the animals. But it's not just learning a language. There are many people that can learn languages. And in fact, I was looking up, there are people that know 30, 40, even 60 languages. It's including different dialects. Imagine what that is, learning 60 different languages. So there are many people that can learn a language. You get the Rosetta Stone on how to speak to your dog. You get the Rosetta Stone on how to speak to your cat or your parrot. Parrots sometimes speak back. You go and you can just learn a language. But it's not that easy. You can't just learn a language of the animal. Why not? If it's just another language, just like we could learn Chinese, we could go and we could learn dog. We could learn cow. We could learn deer, whatever it is. We could learn the language of the animals. And the answer is it's not just the language. They're a different species. That's why men can't communicate with women. It's the same similar concept. Different species. We could try to learn the language of the woman, and a woman could try to learn but it doesn't work out. Right? There's always some sort of issues. There's different species. When you're dealing with human and when you're dealing with animals, there are different species. They think differently. Their chemical makeup is different. Their whole wiring is different. So ask the philosophers. If the difference of the makeup between animals and humans are so diverse, to such a level that we can never understand, we can never communicate with these animals, then how is it possible to communicate with God? How is it possible to have a connection with God? If we can't connect to an animal species, which is so close to our DNA, how could we expect to connect to God, who is so infinitely greater and different in between animals to humans to humans to God? So this philosophical question, each sect deals with a little bit differently. An example is, let's say you look at Christianity. Christianity had to sort of, in a subconscious way, now there's a son of God. So there's a human being, and now the human being, you can connect to it. There are, let's say, many polytheistic religions. How do these polytheistic polytheistic means many gods. How do these many gods go? Because God is too much to deal with. But you know what? You have a specialist. Just like you go to a specialist of a surgeon, you would go to a specialist of a god. Polytheistic religion says that you have a specialist for the war, you have a specialist for the money, you have a specialist for love, you have a specialist for health, you have a specialist for children. Everybody deals with it, makes them more relatable. But what does Judaism teaches us? Judaism teaches us that no, God is with us all the times. And not only that God is with us, but we have a connection to God. But even more so, and listen to this, something crazy, even more so, the love that God has to the Jewish nation is on the same level. Listen to this. The Kuvim on top of the Aron in the Bet HaMikdash symbolizes this connection between the Jewish nation and God. One Kuv symbolizes the Jewish nation. The other symbolizes God. And what's even greater, says Rabbi Shimshon Pincus, is that these Kuvim, they were equal. They were equal to each other. Says the pasuk in Shir HaShirim, chapter 5, verse 2. It says when speaking, this is made into a song. What was that? I believe it's with Simcha Leiner. Ani yishena v'libi el kol dodi dofek, and it says pitchili, and it says achoti, rayati, yonati, tamati. It says my sister, my beloved, my dove, my perfect one. When dealing with the relationship between God and the Jewish nation. But what is the Shir HaShirim Rabbah? The Midrash goes and tells us, don't call it Tamati, don't call it the perfect one, call it Tu'umati, call it my twin, meaning it's the same level. And this is how Rabbi Shimshon Pincus goes and explains this. Yeah, I'm speaking too fast. I know I'm going too fast. I apologize, guys. I'm getting too excited. I have to slow myself down. Imagine you got a big rabbi, like the Ben Ish Chai, Rabbi Yosef Chaim from Baghdad. It was a Gaon of unparalleled levels, huge mikubah. He has a little son, comes running up to him, and he goes to him, Abba, Daddy, Tati, give me please X, Y, and Z. So what is this genius, this Gadol Hadol, this Rabbi Ish Chai, what would he say? He says, go ask your mother. He says, but wait a minute, why does he have to go ask his mother? He says, this guy is a genius. The Ben Ish Chai is a genius. He knows the entire Torah, Kol HaTorah Kula. He fasted for 40 years. He finished everything. He's such on a high level. And his wife, with all her greatness, she wasn't the Ben Ish Chai. But still, he needed to ask her. Why? Because when she married him, she became his equal. She became his tu'amati. She became his twin. What connects the husband to the wife, no matter what level they are on? The husband could be the king of the world. The wife could be the slave of the world, so to speak. What connects them and brings them to the same level? The answer is ahava, love. You have stories of tzaddikim, righteous people, where people come to them, couples come to them, let's say for example, that they've tried to have children for years and years and years. They went to doctors, they tried treatments and nothing worked. The doctor says, give up, forget about it, you're going to ruin your life, go move on with your life, go adopt, do something else. And they go to this tzaddik, they go and they say, please bless us, please help us with this situation that we're dealing with. And the tzaddik goes and it says, and many times not only does the tzaddik goes and blesses them for a child, but sometimes he promises them for a child. And you know what happens? Says the Gemara on Shabbat, page 63a. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gozer gzera. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God goes and makes a decree. But who? The tzaddik mevatla. He could go and he could remove the decree. And we see this time and time again. Where you have people, let's say that they couldn't have any children. Or people that were on their deathbed. The doctors gave up hope in any situation. And the rabbi said, don't worry about it, you're going to have a child. Or don't worry about it, you're going to be healed. And you know what happens? It gets healed. That's the power that it is. That's the connection. That's the love. That brings them on the same level. Says Rabbi Shimshon Pincus, you know what? The greatest miracle of anything of the universe is that we could connect to God. And now that we can connect to God, we connect to God to such a level of love. Now, explains Rabbi Shimshon Pincus, which scenario shows a greater love to God? You have scenario number one. You have a wealthy man who has everything. He has a huge, successful business. He has slaves. He has mansions. He has everything that's going for him. And he marries a simple woman, as many wealthy men, like to do, because, a woman doesn't, if she comes from a wealthy family, she thinks so highly of herself. So some people like to get a woman from a lower end and say, listen, you know who's boss. Always a good way to start a marriage, right? So he brings and he goes and he marries a simple woman. Now, he brings her into his mansion, and now she has slaves, now she has these mansions, now she has these cars, she has everything that she needs. That's scenario number one. Think about the love between the man and the woman. Scenario number two, the same man. Wealthy man, all the luxuries in the world. Private jet, private yacht, everything. And he marries a simple woman. But now, the woman was not so interested in that lifestyle. She wants to live simply. She wants to live in her hometown, in her little shack. That's what she wants. And this man, this wealthy, whatever you want to call it, ruler, king, whatever it is, he leaves everything and he goes and he dwells and he lives together simply with his wife. What will be greater love when the husband goes and brings the simple wife, the poor wife, let's say, up to his palace, or when this wealthy man goes down and relinquishes everything, goes down and lives with his wife in the simple shack? It's simple and obvious that the greater love is when someone from on top goes down to live with someone down below, with someone who he loves. This is the secret. This is the difference between Chanukah and the other holidays. Chanukah technically is a weekday. You're allowed to work, do everything, go business as usual. On the Shalosh Regalim, it's a special time. We don't work. It's a Yom Tov. Obviously, Chanukah is also Yom Tov, but it's a different level. On the Shalosh Regalim, on the three festivals, on Pesach, on Shavuot, on Sukkot, God lifts us up, so to speak, to Him. God brings us up to His palace. These holidays are called Mikrei Kodesh, times of Kedusha. Shabbos also, Shabbat is Shabbat Kadosh, it's something that's Kedusha. So this is a miracle that God goes and brings us from the simple level that we are on, and He raises us up to this level of spirituality, and He raises up to sort of to speak to the level of Shemayim, to the level of heavens. But then Chanukah comes. Chanukah is a Nes Gadol. You want to know why? The Jewish people were on the lowest level, on the bottom of the bottom. They were in the darkness. They were Hellenized. They went and they became, unfortunately, Greek. But few Jews remained strong. And then there was a miracle made. The miracle of darkness, this revealed to the Jewish nation God's great love for the Jewish nation. As it says in Tehillim, chapter 91, verse 15, it says, Imo anochi batzara, I am with him in distress. God went, that there's in Chanukah and all the other holidays? All the other holidays, God raised us up to His level. Chanukah, God came down to our level. God came down to where we were, on the lowest level. In order to understand this, the two miracles that we started off saying, there's a miracle of the war and there's the miracle of the oil. The miracle of the war, the military victory, this we needed. It was a must. Because if not for this military victory, we would have been lost. We would have been wiped out. We would have been killed out eventually, or we would have been assimilated, unfortunately. But the miracle of the light, that wasn't necessary. We didn't need to light with kosher oil sealed from the Kohen Gadol. It was Tumah B'tzibur. We were able to light with any of the oils. We wanted to go on light specially, so the miracle was not even a necessity. It wasn't even needed. We could have gone up with lighting with anything else. In order to understand this, we look at the story of Yosef. Yosef was sold by his own family to a bunch of Arabs, right? And they went and they basically gave up on him. His whole family gave up on him. And these Arabs came and they were going to go and sell him as a slave, meaning his life, for all practical purposes, was over at this point. And he gets into the caravan, he gets into his hostage situation, and the Arabs, instead of selling their bad oils, the smelly stuff that they usually sell with, they were smelling spices. And it smelled good. That was great. It smelled good in his hostage situation. So somebody, unfortunately, got kidnapped by Hezbollah, got by whatever, the Palestinian, whatever it is, got kidnapped by the worst of the worst. I don't know who's on the top list. By ISIS is already last year's news, right? Over 2 years ago. He got kidnapped by somebody he got kidnapped by somebody very, very serious. And he's tied up. Everything is looking very bleak. And there's a little bottle of air freshener sitting right next to it. It was plugged into the wall. And every 2 seconds, it would get a little burst of pure linen scent. And you're sitting over there, cuffed to whatever, in the presence of the lowest of the low, sold by your brothers, and it smells good. And what did Joseph go? Be like, oh, God is smiling at me. What? This is something we spoke about many, many times. Who cares about the smelling of the spice? Who cares that while Yosef was going and he went and he was sold by his brothers, the Arabs were going and they were smelling spice, so it smelled good. The answer is that Hashem was subtly telling Yosef, I didn't forsake you. I am coming down with you. Yes, you're going through a difficult journey right now. Yes, each and every single one of us, we're going through whatever it is that we're going through. But look at the smelling. Look at the spice that's coming down. This showed that God never forsake Yosef. God was always with him. He had to go through something, but there was always a little light at the end of the tunnel. There was always that slither of light that showed that God was always with him. When the Jews went out of Egypt, they looked outside, and what it was spring. It was nice weather. And God said, you see, look, I made it nice weather for you. I mean, we just left this horrific, so many years of torture under Egyptian rule. And we traveled for a period of less than 18 minutes, and it's nice weather. We're looking at the weather. We're thinking about the weather. It's not about the weather. The point is that there's a little bow on top of that present that you're having right now. Or on top of that suffering, there's a little silver lining that's going over there. This is the spice that Yosef smelled. This is the good weather that the Jews, when they left out of Egypt, they sensed. Now, what happened with over here in Chanukah is God showed us that He's with us at all times. The big miracle was not that God went and He saved us. He had to save us. We were the Jewish nation. We would have been lost otherwise. But maybe God wasn't happy with us. And rightfully so, we weren't listening to the Torah. We weren't doing things that we were supposed to. But you know what God did? God said, look, here's the oil. Here's a little gift that I'm going to give to you. This doesn't need to happen. The oil, instead of lasting for 1 day, it lasted for 8 days. An unnecessary miracle. But you don't want to know what that showed? That showed that God is giving a hug to the Jewish nation. God is giving a kiss to the Jewish nation. This showed the closeness that God was. And no matter how far we fall, no matter how low we go, God is always with us. God always loves us. This, says the Rambam, is a reason to say, this is a mitzvah chaviva hi ad me'od. This is something that is very beloved. Look at how much God loves us. Even in our exile, even in our darkness, God goes and God loves us. To understand this in a mashal, a parable, imagine this, you have a great tzaddik, let's use the Ben Ish Chai again. He's coming to your city. I don't know, Tchiyat HaMetim, he's coming back, whatever. He's here, he's coming to your city, right? And imagine the amount of people that are going to go to greet the Ben Ish Chai. Not thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. Right? Remember how we spoke about in the Bet HaMikdash, you're going to be all squished, you're not going to be moved? Trust me, the Ben Ish Chai is coming down, you're not going to be going. Chassidim, Sfaradim, and everybody in between are going to greet the Ben Ish Chai. You're sitting over there, you don't have to move, you're just moving. And all of a sudden the Ben Ish Chai comes out. And you're sitting over there like a few hundred rows back. And also the Ben Ish Chai points directly in your direction. Can we get that? Oh, here we go. Directly in your, and you're like, and everybody's like turning around and everyone's like, and the Ben Ish Chai is like, that until everybody sort of goes and points at you, it'll be like, me? And the Ben Ish Chai goes like this, when you come. And you're like, at this point, you're probably like, am I dreaming? Like, what is the Ben Ish Chai for me? He's like, maybe he saw some of my sins. What's going on? You're going and you're freaking out. You don't know what's going on. But imagine another scenario. Imagine the Ben Ish Chai comes out, and instead of him pointing at you and telling you to come, he starts walking to you. And can you just picture the scenario. Ben Ish Chai is walking. Kriyat Yam Suf is going to be everybody's going to be like splitting. The splitting of the sea, and Ben Ish Chai walks right to you. And not only he comes to you, assuming this is a situation where the guy's a man, right? Because the Ben Ish Chai goes and doesn't just shake your hand. He goes and gives you a hug, gives you a pre-corona or post-corona, whatever it is, right? He goes and he gives you a hug, gives you a kiss, and Ben Ish Chai goes and he's hugging you. He'd be like, what? Are you kidding me? Like, what's going on over here? And then he goes and he says, I want you to come to my house. I want you to come and visit me. I want you to stay by me. Now this guy is, when he's going to go leave, he's going to be like, this is a crazy miracle. This was like, why did the Ben Ish Chai come to me? Like, why out of everybody, the hundreds of thousands of people that came to me? You know what the time of Chanukah was? The Jews were on the lowest level. The lowest level, and God came down to us. God came down to us. You know what the miracle of Yetziat Mitzrayim showed? It showed the glory of God. As it says in Shemot, in Exodus, chapter 8, verse 18, that the miracles, the purpose were, Leman Teda ki ani Hashem b'kerev haaretz, that you should know that I am God amongst the land. I am God. It was showing who is boss. The miracle in the Bet HaMikdash showed that God controls nature. There was one holiday that wasn't designed to show the splendor of God. You know what was it designed? It was designed to show the love to the Jewish nation. And that miracle is Chanukah. And how? Specifically, the miracle of the oil. On the Shalosh HaGalim, God brings us up to Him. On Chanukah, God comes down to us. You think about the difference between a healthy relationship and an unhealthy relationship. So we know that a healthy relationship, it's not about what the other person can do for me, but rather, what can I do for the other person? So imagine a husband comes home, and even better yet, let's rephrase this scenario. A husband goes and speaks to, let's say, a therapist together with his wife, And the husband goes and complains about his wife. He says, listen, I am the best husband, as every husband will attest to. I am the best. Like she is so lucky that she's what? Do you know how lucky I am? The best. I'm like, it's crazy. I can really give, like, it's crazy how good I am, right? Every husband thinks that they're their best husband. And I give her money. I give her help. She has maids. I give her vacations. I'm doing my part, but she is not holding up her end of the deal. The house is always dirty. The homework is never done. The kids are never showered. Supper is always late. Blah, 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 blah. All these problems. And she goes and she says, he's lucky. He's lucky. Do you know how awesome I am? I work hard all day. I am sitting there and I am picking up and dropping off the kids in school. I'm running to doing the shopping. And you know what happens? He comes home and he's not holding up his end of the deal. The homework is not done. The kids are not showered. The same complaints going and be like, he's supposed to be doing that. She's supposed to be doing that. Everybody's saying this is what he is supposed to be doing for me. This is what she's supposed to be doing for me. And yet it doesn't happen. The relationship is not what this spouse can do for me, but rather what can I do for them. So you know what an optimal scenario is? An optimal scenario is when a husband comes home after a long day of hard work. And he goes over to his wife and he says, my dear darling wife, who I love tremendously from the bottom of my heart, and I will give my body for her and my shirt off my back. Is there anything I could help you? And she goes back, my darling husband, who I love with every fiber of my being, who is my soul of my mate, and blah, 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 right? No, there's nothing. Have a seat, please, and have a beer. You know, I got this. Taken care of. That is nice situation if you're on drugs. But normally, right, so if you're coming in a normal situation, you know what happens, unfortunately? A husband comes home after, a long day of work, and he says, my dear darling wife, can I, or it's better yet, hey, can I help you with anything? And she goes, like, oh, you want to help me now? Where were you for the past 2 hours? You finished work 2 hours ago, and you're sitting over here, the kids are not showered, you're over there. Now you want to help me? You know what? He could be like, forget it. You help yourself then. I came here to help you, and now you are to go, and you got to try, then it goes like, ba ba ba, and ba ba ba, and ba ba ba, and then you don't hear anything. And the kids start crying, and whatever. Let's not go further in that story. At that moment, when the wife goes over to the husband, be like, you want to help me? You want to help me now after you were so late coming home from work, blah, blah, all these excuses? The husband could go and blow up. But you know what? If let's say he doesn't. Let's say he says, you know what? You're right. I'm sorry. I had to work a little bit late. I had to run. Let me do, and he doesn't ask her for help. He starts helping around. And he says, you know what? Tomorrow I'm going to come home earlier. You know what a healthy relationship is? A healthy relationship is that even if you're pushed into the corner, even if your spouse is screaming at you, you still only want to do for the other. That's a healthy relationship. It's easy to always want to do with the other when everything is going great. And the husband be like, hey, can I get you anything, my darling? Yeah, can you get me a cup of water? And the wife says, hey, my darling, can I get you something? And be like, yes, can you get me please a pie of pizza? And everybody's happy. And she's drinking her water. He is eating his calories. Everybody is happy. Everybody is living their life. But what happens when there's some friction? What happens when there's some darkness? What happens when there's some struggling? How are you going to go and make that into a healthy relationship? A healthy relationship means that even when you're struggling, you only want to do for the other. So one way to do that is you need a certain little bit of catalyst. That if you know that the other side hates you from the bottom of your being, your husband hates you so badly, or the wife hates you so badly, it's very difficult to always want to do good even if you're getting screamed at. But let's say you know that the other person loves you to no extent, to the depths of their heart, they love you so much, but they're having a difficult day. That will be able to go, the love, the ahava, the connection, that will be able to go and push you through that difficult time. But if you feel that the other side only hates you, wants to punish you, wants to make you burn for every disobeying of their commandment, how are you going to go and be dealing with them in this situation when it's difficulty, when it's darkness? So the bottom line is that if you know the other side loves you no matter what, and is always there and is always with you, it makes it easier to cope with the darkness. It makes it easier to cope with the difficulties. It makes it easier to cope with all the suffering that you're going through. Comes Chanukah. Chanukah is a time when the Jewish nation is at its very, very low point. And you know what God says? I love you. I care about you. Here's a hug. Here's a hug from God. God says there's going to be a long exile ahead of you. The exile of Chanukah was the last miracle, the last holiday we have until today, until Mashiach comes. So there's a long exile ahead of you. Know that I love you, know that I care about you, no matter what happens the next thousands of years, I'm going to always be with you. And how did God show that to us? We didn't need the miracle of the oil. God gave that to us because that was a hug from God. That was a hug from Hashem. And I want to share with you two stories. The first story is from Rabbi Binyamin Przansky. It says a story of this rabbi was driving in Flatbush on Erev Rosh Hashanah. And as anybody who lives in Flatbush knows that there can be traffic. In some random times, it is possible that there will be a little bit of traffic. Bart Park is known to have maybe one or two cars driving the streets. So it was a little bit of traffic that was going on. And he was sitting there at a intersection. It was at the red light. And as he's looking at the red light, he's looking around, and he sees over there this, one of his old, it wasn't like a student, but somebody that he was trying to help. It was a guy who was 6'4", huge guy. And somehow, good family, good upbringing, everything was good. And it was sort of like a little bit of a mystery on how he went off, but he went off. He wasn't interested in Judaism. He stopped keeping Shabbos. He stopped putting on tefillin. He stopped keeping kosher. Stopped living as a Jew, basically. So the rabbi sees this boy, not a boy, he's a football player, and honks a horn. He says, hey Jake, you wanna come? I'll give you a lift somewhere. And Jake sees this rabbi. He goes and waves him, and he comes into the car. He runs into the car. The light turns green, and they start driving. So they're starting to do some small talk. And the rabbi says, listen, what's your plans for Rosh Hashanah? And starting in a few hours. And Jake says, he started shrugging. He says, Rosh Hashanah? He says, what do you think? He says, I haven't heard shofar or fasted on Yom Kippur for several years already. He says, Rosh Hashanah, what's Rosh Hashanah? So the rabbi goes and says, listen, I'm heading towards Bar Park. Why don't you come along? You have nothing else to do anyways, just tag along. He says, fine, got nothing else doing. I'll come with you. They're driving. They're getting to Bar Park. And suddenly the rabbi goes and says, listen, doesn't your grandfather live somewhere around here? And this Jake's grandfather was a big tzaddik. And the Jake says, yeah, he lives 2 blocks away. So the rabbi guy says, that many Jews go and they seek blessings, from the special day before Rosh Hashanah from a tzaddik. Maybe we'll go and stop by and say hi to your grandfather. Maybe we'll get a little blessing. So Jake says, listen, I haven't seen him in years. It's not really going to be so good. But, the rabbi goes and says, it's El Rosh Hashanah. Your grandfather's big tzaddik. Come on, let's just go. We'll do it quick. And Jake goes says, you really think you want to see me? He thinks I'm a shegitz. He thinks I'm a bum. He thinks I'm a nobody. And the rabbi guy says, listen, I'm sure your grandfather loves you. And that was like a trigger word, love. And Jake says, love? Yeah, right. Love, no such thing. And he goes and he says, never in my life did anybody ever show me love. Never did I get a hug or a kiss from my family. Now the rabbi heard him mumbling this under his breath, and he's like, what did you say? And Jake's like, no, nothing, just like my family doesn't really love me. And he goes and says, listen, Jake, I'm sure your grandfather loves you. He's your grandfather. He says, let's just stop by for a minute. And Jake, he was able to convince him, and they finally agreed. As he was driving, the rabbi was thinking to himself, it's a little bit of, it's comical and sad how you have this 6'4" monster of a guy wanting a hug, and at the same point in time, it was sad that he never got any hugs or kisses from his family. So he goes and he arrives at the grandfather's home, and Jake goes inside. Meanwhile, the rabbi stayed outside. He says, I'm going to be right in. As he's waiting outside, he calls Jake's mother. And he says, listen, I just picked up Jake, and I dropped him off by, by his grandfather. And is there a reason why he would mention that he never got any hugs or any love from the family? And the mother was like, listen, Rabbi, we're not the touchy type. We're not the mushy type. We're not me and my husband, we're not the type that hugs or kisses, our kids. It's just who we are. So the rabbi goes and says, listen, Jake really needs a hug. He really needs to show. He says, I'm sure you love him. I'm sure you care about him, but he's not getting that message. So the rabbi gets off the phone quickly, and he runs up the stairs to where Jake was with his grandfather. And as he gets in there, he sees that Jake is about to leave his grandfather. He starts walking away. And suddenly the rabbi goes over to the grandfather, and he sort of signals him, with his hands, give him a hug, give him a hug, hug him. And the grandfather understood what he was saying. And as Jake was leaving the room, the grandfather walked after him, and he sort of stretched out his arms, and he was sort of embracing him for a hug. And Jake was confused. Then he sees his grandfather, and all of a sudden, he goes in, and the grandfather gives him a hug. And they leave, and they go back into the car. He's sitting over there, and Jake, this 6'4" of a football player sitting over there in complete shock. He couldn't say a word. And then after like long moments of silence, he's like, he gave me a hug. I can't believe it. He really gave me a hug. And the rabbi didn't want to interfere, and he was like constantly like, in his thoughts, it's like, my grandfather hugged me. It was such a huge news to him because he never got that before. And after a few minutes, they were at a red light, and all of a sudden Jake goes over to the rabbi and says, maybe I should start putting on tefillin. Start off the year right, you know what I'm saying? Maybe it's time for me to keep Shabbat. And the rabbi never in his wildest dreams thought that this was going to happen. It's like, did not expect this to happen. And you know what happened? Jake kept that Rosh Hashanah. He fasted that Yom Kippur. When he put on tefillin, he kept Shabbat ever since that day. We have no way of understanding the value of a hug. We have no way of understanding the value of when we show love to our family members, when we show love to our kids, and how much it means. It's priceless. It's priceless. The hug that we got on Chanukah was a priceless hug, a hug that we so desperately needed. We thought we were all alone. We thought we were the darkness, and God goes, no. Here, let me give you this hug. Sometimes the parents need to give the hug to the children, and sometimes it's the other way around. I want to share with you one final story. And this is a story that is very famous, and I'm sure most of you heard it, and if not, then you'll hear it now, but I'm sure you've heard it. And that is the story of Devil. And I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about. In the winter of 2008-2009, there was known as the Gaza War, or otherwise as Operation Cast Lead. This was the war when Israel went into Gaza. Now, there was, unfortunately, the first casualty, the first Israeli soldier killed. His name was Devir Amnulav. And he was the first tragedy. And the family situation was very, very sad because the father had recently died of cancer 2 years before Devir was killed. And Devir was the only son. They had some daughters, but he was the only son. Now, the mother, which her name was Dalia, took this very hard. She just lost her husband 2 years ago, and now she lost her son, Devir. She felt that this was a slap in the face from God, and she was very angry at God. She decided that she's not praying anymore, she's not making any brachot. She was like, she couldn't do anything of that. One day, few months go by, one day she's walking around in her house, and her house is empty. Her husband is gone, Devir is gone, her daughters weren't home. And for the first time since her son died, she decides that she's going to talk to God. And she goes over to God and she starts crying. She says, did I do something wrong? Like, why are you doing this to me? A question that many people ask when they're going through difficulty. Why, God? Why are you doing this to me? And she's going through very difficult, and she started talking to God. And then she goes and says, God, says, do me a favor. Please give me a hug from Devil. I want to know that his death had some meaning. So Dalia and some of her friends, they planned on going in the summer to a place called Chutzot Hayotzel. It's a sort of an artist colony outside of the old city of Yerushalayim. And they decided they were going to go on a certain date. But Dalia's younger daughter said, no, can we go a week later to this area because there's a concert over there and I want to go to this concert. So Dalia was very depressed. The mother of Devir was very depressed. She did not want to go to that concert. But again, her daughter also went through a lot and she didn't want to disappoint her daughter. So she decided she's going to go to this concert. A week later, they find themselves sitting in the concert, waiting for the performance to begin. Now, this auditorium, this place was huge. They had room for 8,000 seats. She's sitting over there, waiting with her daughter, waiting for the concert to begin. All of a sudden, there's a little tap on her shoulder, and she turns around, and she sees this little cute boy, 2 years old, blonde hair, blue eyes, just looking at her, smiling, and she goes, and she was a kindergarten teacher, so she was very familiar with kids, and she was like, hello, little boy, how are you? And he's just like looking at her and says, do you want to sit next to me? And this is Israel, so this is not weird. This is where kids go out to work at the age of 3 or 4. So he goes and he sits down next to her, and meanwhile, the father, which was sitting 2 rows back, was observing the whole thing. And all of a sudden, he goes, and he calls out to him, and he says, this boy's name was Eshel. And he says, Eshel, why don't you come and sit next to me and Devil? And suddenly, the Dalia, the mother of Devil, turns around and she says, "What did you say your son's name is?" And the father's like, "Who? Devil? The one, he was holding a baby." And he says, "Devil." He says, "His name is Devil." He says, "Why?" He says, "How old is he?" And the father says, "He's 6 months." And she goes and says, "Was he born after Cast Lead or before?" And he goes, "After." And the woman goes and says, forgive me, but why did you name him Devil? So at this point, Devil's mother, which was sitting also nearby, began to explain. And she says, she was an officer dealing with the wounded soldiers in the army. And she was pregnant at the time. And she went to get her ultrasound. And she was about 33 or 34 weeks pregnant. And the ultrasound showed that there was a serious problem with the baby. That the baby is probably going to need some sort of dialysis, some sort of treatment right after he cuts out. There's some serious issues, they noted. They consulted with some medical experts and they realized that there's nothing that they could do, but they would have to wait to see when the baby is born and then take it from there. So a day or two later, after the ultrasound, the mother was home. The mother that was pregnant now with this baby was home, and it was Chanukah. She lit the candles, and then she went and she turned on the news. And this is where it came out, the story about Devir Emanuelov, this first soldier that was killed in this war. And she was very saddened by the news. She was very connected to as all Jews are, we're very saddened when we lose a fellow Jew. And she decided that she's going to make a deal with God. And the deal was as follows. She says, God, if you give me a healthy son, I promise to name him Devir in memory of the soldier that was killed. A short while later, she gives birth to a healthy, beautiful baby boy. And true to her word, she named him Devir. Now Dalia, the mother of Devir, is sitting over there with her mouth open, like in shock. After this, the mother of Devir, the mother of the baby Devir, is telling the story to the mother of the soldier Devir, who was sitting over there. And after like a few seconds, Dalia goes over and says, I'm Devir's mother. And the parents were like, what? She's like, yeah, that was my son. I'm his mother. And the parents didn't believe her. They were like, are you from? And she's like, yeah, my name is Dalia Aminalov, and I'm from Pisgat Ze'ev, and that was my son Devir. The woman, the two women over there, they couldn't believe it. They fell into each other's arms. They were hugging, they were kissing, they were crying. And then suddenly, out of the blue, for no reason whatsoever, the mother of baby Devir picks up Devir. She has a sudden inspiration. She goes over to Dalia and says, here, Devir wants to give you a hug. Those were the words that she used. Devir wants to give you a hug. And the emotion that this Dalia felt at this point was unexplainable. She literally just asked God. It says, God, please give me a hug from Devir. I want to know that his death meant something. And not a short while later did she get a hug from Devir. You want to know what Chanukah is? Chanukah is a hug from God. Chanukah is indeed a Nes Gadol. Chanukah is a time when God comes down to our level, our low level. Imagine that wealthy person going to live with a simple woman. He goes and he gives up everything and he comes down to our level. God left everything and came down to our level. This is really a Nes Gadol. This is really She'asa Nitim Lavotenu. This is something that God did, a very great miracle. And certainly, when we see the love that God has for us, this is really something that we could say, as the Rambam says, this is a mitzvah, that chaviva hi ad ma'od. It's something that is so beloved. There's something so special about Chanukah. Because Chanukah is a time when we're going into the darkness of our exile, the darkness of the winter months, the difficult time that we have to deal with our lives. No matter where it is and where we are, we're going through difficulties. But Chanukah teaches us on how to cope with that. Because no matter how far you've fallen, no matter how low you have gotten, and no matter where you are down in the dumps, God is there and God is waiting out there with outstretched arms, just wanting to give you a hug. That is the miracle of Chanukah. The miracle of Chanukah is that the hug that we get from God. Now it is incumbent upon each and every single one of us that no matter what we're dealing with in our lives, all the problems, all the situations, each and every single one of us gets a hug from God. Just like this little miracle that we had with the 8 candles, the oil that lasted for 8 nights as opposed to lasting for 1 night is a hug from God. We each get that little miracle, that little hug. We just got to open our eyes and see it. Sometimes it comes as a parking spot in Brooklyn. That's a miracle in itself, right? Otherwise, it's whatever. There's something that you see, the light that you see that God is shining, the little spices in the getaway car, in your hostage car. You're smelling the little pine tree that's hanging on the rearview mirror. There's something that's smelling because God is showing us no matter where we are in our life, God loves us, God cares about us, and God will always, always be with us. We will open up now for some questions. Okay, question number 1. You could type in the chat any questions. Question number 1 is, Could the scenario of Chanukah be compared to our current times where Klal Yisrael is unfortunately at such a low level? Yep. I see this was asked earlier. And Be'ezrat Hashem, when Mashiach comes, it will be the highest form of Hashem's love with His holy children and stayed loyal to Him. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a time where no matter how low we are, God is always showing us that God loves us, God cares about us. And that in itself, do you realize that, we spoke about the difference of relationships, how difficult it is to deal. If, let's say, your relationship's all great and dandy, then yes, you could always do for the other person. But what happens if it looks like God is angry at you? God is always punishing you. Then how are you going to go and you're pushed into the corner like this husband came home and his wife is screaming at him, whoa, now you're coming home, now you want to help? We're going in there and all of a sudden we want to be a good Jew. And all of a sudden God is punishing us with this and punishing us with that. And we're saying, God, what do you want from us? It's very difficult to overcome that. But you want to know what the catalyst? You want to know what will help us get through that? That is when you realize that God loves us no matter where we are and how far we have fallen. God always loves us. That gives us the power to get through that darkness and to serve God in a level, even though unfortunately it may be difficult for us. Question number 2. Suggestion to tap into Hashem's closeness. This Chanukah, we can try to be extra grateful to Hashem, to notice and thank Him for all the incredible things He does for us every single day, and we will have many things to be thankful for no matter what we're going through. Yes, thank you very much. What a great idea. I am very into gratitude, Hakarat Tov, so yes, I think that's a great idea. This Chanukah, how about this? Maybe we could do something like this. Every night of Chanukah, if it's the first night, say one thing that you're thankful for. The second night, say 2 things that you're thankful for. Until the 8th night, where you say 180 things that I'm just kidding. You say 8 things that you're thankful for. Okay, looks like that is all for the questions. Okay, thank you all for joining. And next week probably won't be because we give a class because it's Chanukah, but B'ezrat Hashem the week after that.